If you've ever been told that your sensitivity is actually a weakness, then you need to hear this. Today, we are going to explore a completely new framework for strength, the architecture of hyperresilience. Let's jump in.
So let's just start with a question that might feel a little too familiar. Has anyone ever told you that you're too sensitive? You know, that your reactions are just too big, that you feel things way too deeply, or that it just takes you too long to get over a setback?
If that sounds familiar, then you've probably gotten the standard diagnosis that comes with it. The world looks at that sensitivity and just slaps a label on it, fragility. And the prescription? It's always the same, isn't it? You just need to develop a thicker skin. You need to be tougher. But what if that entire diagnosis, that entire way of thinking, is just wrong? What if the goal was never to be hard and simple and impenetrable? This is the core idea we're diving into today. You were never meant to be a brick. So that brings us to our first section. We're going to completely dismantle this thick skin myth. And we're going to do it by looking at the two flawed metaphors society loves to use for resilience, the dandelion and the brick. Right? People see those who just seem to bounce back from anything. They call them dandelions, and they tell you to be more like them. They see the time it takes you to process something as a weakness, like it's a bug in your system that needs to be patched up with toughness. And this is where that whole analogy just completely falls apart. Think about it. A brick is durable, sure, but only up to a point. When it finally hits its limit, it doesn't bend, it shatters. It's a catastrophic failure, turning into useless dust with absolutely no way to rebuild. That's not resilience. That's just a ticking time bomb. Okay, so if you're not a brick, what are you? It is time for a major reframe. We need to forget about simple, clunky objects. I want you to start thinking of yourself as something far more complex, an intricate architectural structure, a cathedral of the mind. Now this chart, this really lays it all out. On one side, you have the old model. It's all about being simple and just bouncing back. But the cathedral model, that's totally different. It understands complexity, it doesn't just survive pressure, it actually uses it to upgrade itself, to rebuild stronger. It's the difference between a blurry, low-res summary of an event and a high-fidelity 8K recording.
And this leads us to a whole new definition of resilience, structural integration. For you, it is not about snapping back to who you were before the crisis. That's actually impossible. It's about taking the raw data from that intense experience and using it to rebuild your entire identity at a higher, more complex resolution than you had before.
But why? Why is your experience so different? Why can't you just get over it like everyone else seems to? Well, the answer isn't a character flaw. It's in your biology. Let's take a look at the hardware behind what we're calling 8K processing. Your brain engages in something called hyperencoding. So while other people might record a bad event as a simple low-res summary, like, okay, that was bad, I'll avoid that, your mind captures everything. The exact tone of voice somebody used, the smell in the room, that sinking feeling in your chest. You're not just remembering it, you're processing a massive amount of high-fidelity data. We can even think about this like an equation. Now, don't worry about the math, just look at the relationship. Resilience is the meaning you create from an event, divided by the sheer intensity and complexity of the data you recorded. So when that data load is incredibly high, but the meaning is low, your system just stays inflamed. The goal isn't to feel less, it's to integrate more meaning. So how in the world do you integrate that meaning? This brings us to a really beautiful and honestly powerful metaphor for this whole rebuilding process, the kintsugi model.
First things first, we have to completely reframe the crisis itself. That feeling of shattering, the heartbreak, the failure, the betrayal, that is not the end. It is not a system failure. Think of it as the necessary demolition phase. You have to clear out the old, insufficient structure to make way for a major architectural upgrade.
And that's why this process takes time. It's metabolically expensive. You know, while other people might be quickly patching things up, building shacks, you're doing something way more profound. You aren't just building a shack. You are rebuilding a sanctuary. And this idea perfectly captures the kintsugi philosophy. You know, that Japanese art where they repair broken pottery with gold lacquer? It becomes more beautiful and more valuable because it was broken. Your scars, they are not signs of weakness. They are the golden seams filled with the meaning you integrated, proving that your system has been tested and upgraded by pressure. Okay, so that's the theory, that's the mindset. But how do we actually put this into practice? Let's get tactical. Let's talk about the integration protocol and how we move from understanding the architecture to actually taking action.
Here are 4 clear steps. Number 1, you reframe your narrative from victim to architect. 2, you ground yourself somatically, in your body, to signal to your nervous system that the threat is actually over. 3, you find the gold leak, that one key insight from the crisis, and apply it. And finally, 4, you practice strategic vulnerability. You show your golden seams to help guide others. Now, that first step, narrative reframing, it's maybe the most powerful of all. It's just a simple shift in language, but it has these profound implications. You stop being the passive victim of your story and you become the active, empowered architect of your own being.
When you start to consistently apply this protocol, something absolutely incredible happens. You don't just become resilient, you achieve a fundamental system upgrade. You move from a state of being fragile to one of being anti-fragile. So let's look at the difference. A fragile system, it breaks under stress. It wants to avoid chaos at all costs. But an anti-fragile system, whoa, it actually thrives and grows from stress and disorder. It doesn't just survive volatility, it uses it as raw data for its next upgrade, becoming more complex and more refined with every single challenge. And this really is the ultimate takeaway. Once you truly, deeply accept that your sensitivity, your capacity to crack, is actually the most valuable part of your architecture, the world fundamentally changes. Stress is no longer a threat that can destroy you. It just becomes the fuel that refines you.
So, what's the one thing you should remember from all of this? You are not a broken version of a normal person. You are a high-resolution version of a human being, tested and refined. And the very things that you were told were your greatest weaknesses are in fact the blueprint for your greatest strength. The cracks, they are where the light enters the engine.
You ever been told you're just too sensitive? That you need to grow a thicker skin? Well, today we're going to completely dismantle that idea. We're diving deep into the science that reframes high sensitivity not as some kind of weakness, but as the actual blueprint for a profound and powerful kind of resilience.
Yeah, this probably sounds pretty familiar, right? You feel things more deeply. You experience setbacks with more intensity, and because of that, you get slapped with a label, fragile. It's a diagnosis that a world often gives out when it mistakes a depth of feeling for a lack of strength.
But what if that entire way of thinking is just wrong? Let's really dig into this idea that this so-called fragility is actually the raw material for a kind of strength that most people can't even begin to imagine.
All right, so first things first, we have to tear down this myth that society is built around what it means to be tough. The whole idea that to be strong, you have to be completely impenetrable. This is a perfect way to think about it. The myth tells you to be like a brick, simple, hard, able to bounce back. But think about it. What happens when a brick finally hits its breaking point? It shatters. It turns to dust. The reality for a complex, sensitive mind is so much more like a cathedral. When it takes damage, it doesn't just bounce back. It goes through what we call structural integration. It can be rebuilt, reinforced, and made even more incredible than it was before.
So why do setbacks feel so completely devastating in the first place? Well, the answer isn't a flaw in your character. It's right there in your biology. Let's get into the science of what I like to call the 8K brain.
Okay, the core concept here is something called hyperencoding. This is a real biological process where your brain doesn't just remember a bad experience, it records it in ultra-high definition. It's like you're capturing every sight, every sound, every emotional texture with this incredible visceral precision.
This really breaks it down beautifully. So you have a dandelion brain that might go through a crisis and just create a simple, low-res summary. Okay, that was bad. Let's not do that again. But then there's the orchid brain, which is so common in highly sensitive people. It creates a full sensory recording. You don't just remember it was bad, you remember the exact tone of their voice, the specific look in their eyes, that sinking feeling in your chest.
And look, this isn't just a feeling. It has a real biological cost. Your brain has these high-density mirror neurons, which means you feel what other people are feeling almost as if it's happening to you. Your insula, which processes gut feelings, is super active. All of this combines to create a massive amount of raw, unintegrated data. It's that high-fidelity recording that your system now has to figure out what to do with.
So here's the bottom line. When someone tells you to just get over it, they have no idea what kind of hardware you're running. Your brain isn't being difficult,
It's diligently trying to process this enormous, high-definition data file that most people don't even have.
Okay, so understanding the problem. That's step one. Now let's build a totally new model for growth, one that actually works with your neurobiology, not against it.
And that's really the question, isn't it? If you're working with this massive, high-resolution data file of your own life, how do you turn it from a huge burden into an incredible source of strength? We can actually think about this as a kind of resilience coefficient. Now, don't worry, this isn't a math test. But the formula basically says this. True resilience is what you get when you create integrated meaning and divide it by the somatic intensity, that's the raw physical feeling of it, times the data complexity, all that 8K detail we talked about. The key is, to get more resilient, you don't try to shrink the feelings or the details. You have to increase the meaning you make from it all. So when that integrated meaning on top is low, the whole equation gets thrown out of whack. All that unprocessed data and physical intensity keeps your system in a state of what we can call relational inflammation. It's like having this chronic alarm of stress and anxiety going off inside because the traumatic file is still open and running in the background.
So how do we actually create that integrated meaning? For this, we can turn to this absolutely beautiful and powerful metaphor from Japanese art that gives us the perfect model for how to rebuild.
It's called kintsugi. It's the art of repairing broken pottery with seams of gold. And the whole philosophy isn't about hiding the damage, it's about illuminating the cracks, which actually makes the piece stronger, more valuable, and way more beautiful because of its history. This is the model for the high-resolution mind.
This process breaks down into 4 phases, which researchers call post-traumatic growth. It all starts with the shattering, a crisis that breaks you. And most people think this is the end, but it's not. It's just the demolition phase before a major upgrade. Then comes the audit, where you get brave and analyze all the broken pieces. Next is the integration. This is where you fill those cracks with the gold of meaning. And the final result? It's not just recovery. It's a true upgrade to a state of hyper-resilience. And this is the profound shift. You don't just become resilient, which is about bouncing back, you become anti-fragile. And that's a system that actually gets stronger and more capable because it's been tested by stress, not in spite of it.
Okay, theory is great, but how do we actually do this? Let's get really practical with a 4-step framework for rebuilding your entire internal architecture. Step 1. You have to reframe your story. Stop saying, I was broken by this. Start saying, my old architecture wasn't enough. I'm now in the demolition and rebuild phase. Just that simple shift in language moves you out of the passive role of a victim and into the powerful, active role of the architect of your own life.
Second, you've got to deal with your body. The trauma lives there too. This means you have to complete the physical stress cycle. Things like deep pressure, intense exercise, even a cold shower. They send a powerful signal to your nervous system that the threat is over. It finally tells your brain it's okay to turn off the alarm bell.
Third is something called the gold leak. You have to look through the shards of that painful experience and find one critical insight. What's the one thing you learned about your own needs, your boundaries, your values? That single piece of wisdom, that is your gold. And you immediately apply it to the blueprint for your new self. And finally, strategic vulnerability. Now, this isn't about oversharing your pain. It's about not hiding your scars. When you show your golden seams, you send a powerful signal to everyone around you that breaking is not the end. It's the beginning of a profound and beautiful rebuild. So, the next time you feel broken, I want you to remember this. You are not a faulty machine. You are a high-performance engine being upgraded. Your sensitivity isn't a bug, it is a feature. And those cracks, they are not signs of weakness. They are the very places where the light gets in. Welcome to This Explainer. You know, we're always told that to survive, you gotta have thick skin. But what if that advice is just based on a totally flawed design? Today, we're gonna dismantle the shame of feeling broken. We're installing a new protocol for post-traumatic growth, and it's not built on being tough, but on being profoundly integrated. Okay, so let's just dive right in with this core idea. The world tells you, be a brick. Be simple, be durable, be tough. But here's the thing about a brick. Under enough pressure, it just shatters. Your mind isn't a brick. It is a far more complex, incredible architectural structure, and that means it needs a completely different model for resilience.
So first up, let's just tackle this common diagnosis you might have given yourself or heard from others, this idea of fragility. But what if bouncing back super fast isn't the only measure of strength?
Seriously, what if it's not even the best one?
Let's think about two different architectures of resilience. On one side, you've got the dandelion. This is the whole bounce-back ideal that we're constantly sold. They can quickly throw up a functional little shack after a storm hits. But then there's the sentinel. Their core beliefs, well, those are like the load-bearing walls of a temple. So when they face a storm, they don't just bounce back. They integrate the experience to rebuild something way, way stronger, a true sanctuary.
And that leads us to a really critical question. If you're someone who identifies more with the sentinel, why do setbacks, a layoff, a heartbreak, a deep betrayal, why do they feel so catastrophic? Why does it literally feel like the entire building is collapsing around you?
Well, it really just comes down to your biology. Your mind doesn't just experience a setback, it hyper-encodes it. You're not just getting a blurry summary of what happened. Nope. Your brain is recording the event in stunning 8K, capturing every single microtexture of the loss with this visceral precision. And that is why you can't just get over it. We can even sort of map this out with what our source material calls the resilience coefficient. Think about it like this. When the physical shock of an event, that's the somatic intensity, and the sheer amount of information your brain just recorded, the data complexity, are incredibly high, the only way to balance that equation is by finding an equally powerful integrated meaning. If you don't find that meaning, your system just stays stuck on high alert. It stays inflamed. And this is such a powerful reframe. That shattering feeling, that's not a sign that you failed, it's the demolition phase, and it's absolutely necessary. You have to clear out the old, insufficient structure before you can even begin a major architectural upgrade.
So let's explore a new blueprint for resilience, one that actually honors this deep, metabolically heavy process, instead of shaming you for it. This brings us to a really crucial point. Our society is obsessed with appearing flawless, right? Hiding any sign of damage. But what if the entire goal of recovery has been completely wrong this whole time? What if the cracks are actually the most important part?
The answer lies in this beautiful, beautiful new model, illustrated perfectly by the Japanese art of kintsugi. See, kintsugi doesn't just fix what's broken, it highlights the repair with pure gold. The philosophy behind it is it's profound. The object's history of being broken and then repaired actually makes it more valuable, more beautiful, and stronger than it was before. This is resilience for the sentinel.
So, a system failure isn't some minor issue for you. Your core assumptions, that the world is fundamentally safe or that people are predictable, these aren't just surface-level ideas. They are the load-bearing walls of your entire psychological structure. So when they come crashing down, of course it feels like total collapse.
And this is exactly why the recovery process feels so slow, so isolating. While everyone else might be quickly throwing up another shack, you are undertaking a much, much more serious project. You're mourning the old structure, you're performing a biological audit of the catastrophe, because you aren't building a shack, you are rebuilding a sanctuary.
So, the big question is, how do we actually do this? How do we practically move from that demolition phase of being shattered to the golden repair of being integrated? Well, we can use what the source material calls the integration protocol. I want you to think of it as the architectural framework for rebuilding that sanctuary, and it's broken down into 4 key steps.
Okay, step 1. You reframe the narrative. This is a decisive shift in perspective. You have to stop seeing yourself as a victim who was broken by something. Instead, you become the architect. Your previous design was simply insufficient for this new level of complexity, and you are now overseeing the rebuild.
Next, you've got to calm the system. Remember, you hyperencode trauma physically in your body, so you have to signal to your nervous system that the threat is gone. You cannot possibly drop new blueprints while the fire alarm is still blaring, right? This step is all about silencing that alarm.
All right, now it's time to find the gold. Remember that 8K recording of the event? It's time to sift through the rubble of that experience and find one critical piece of data, one powerful insight you learned about how your own system operates under pressure. That single insight, that is the precious gold you're going to use to fill the cracks.
And finally, you connect. Don't hide the beautiful repairs you've made. Strategic vulnerability means showing the golden seams. By sharing the story of how you rebuilt, you become a beacon. You signal to other people that this kind of profound, incredible growth is actually possible.
So let's bring this all home. What does it truly mean to live inside this new, hyper-resilient architecture? Here's the final takeaway, and it's a big one.
Let go of the idea that you are a broken version of a normal person. You're not. You are a high-resolution version of a human being whose operating system has been tested, shattered, and then refined by intense pressure into something far more capable. Something that doesn't just recover from stress, but actually thrives because of it.
Just think about that for a second. Your supposed weaknesses, the very cracks that felt like you're undoing, they're actually the apertures. They're the points through which new data, new meaning, and new light can enter the engine of your psyche.
And when you get this, it fundamentally changes your relationship with hardship. Once you truly accept that your cracks are the most valuable parts of your architecture, the world loses its power to destroy you. It only has the power to refine you. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I'm going to leave you with one final question to think about. What gold are you ready to find in your own cracks? Go on and architect your strength.
All right, let's talk about a totally different way of looking at resilience. We're going to move away from this idea that you're something that can be broken and into a new identity. The idea that you are the architect of your own strength. So, has anyone ever hit you with the "you're too sensitive" line or told you to just grow a thicker skin? Yeah, it's pretty frustrating, right? It's like they're telling you that you're fundamentally flawed. But what if they've got it all wrong? What if what they see as a weakness is actually the blueprint for a way more powerful operating system? Okay, so here's the central idea, the big metaphor. People kind of expect you to be a brick. You know, simple, durable, until you're not, until you hit a breaking point and just shatter into dust. But here's the thing. You were never meant to be a brick. You're a cathedral, a complex, intricate structure that, yeah, it can get damaged, but it can also be rebuilt. And when it is, it becomes even more beautiful than before. I really want you to let that one sink in. The moments that felt like shattering, those setbacks you've been carrying around, they are not evidence that you failed. They are literal proof that your system has been stress tested and upgraded. The pressure didn't just break you, it actually refined you. So why? Why do you experience everything with such, intensity? Why does it feel like when things go wrong, they hit you so much harder than everyone else? Well, the answer isn't about your character. It's about your biology. Let's take a look at the actual hardware you're working with. The keyword here is hyper-encoding. See, when you go through something difficult, your brain isn't just taking some blurry snapshot. No, it's recording in stunning 8K, capturing every single detail, every emotion, every sensory input with this incredible, visceral precision. And that is why you can't just get over it. You have a massive amount of data you need to process first. This formula right here, it really illustrates the challenge perfectly. Resilience isn't some fixed trait you either have or you don't. It's a balancing act. And because your system records things with such high physical and emotional intensity and so much complexity, the only way to find balance, to become resilient, is by integrating real meaning from what happened. Without that meaning, the whole system just stays overloaded. But here's where it all flips. That high-resolution hardware, it's also your greatest rebuilding tool. Think about it. You have the raw data for incredible insight. Your empathy allows you to connect on a profound level. And because your brain is an elite pattern recognition machine, you have a vastly increased capacity for something called post-traumatic growth. That moment of crisis, when it all feels like it's shattering, it really feels like the end, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a necessary demolition phase. It's what has to happen to clear the way for a major architectural upgrade. You've got to tear down the old, insufficient structure to build something so much stronger. And this brings us to a really beautiful way to think about resilience. It's a philosophy borrowed from an ancient Japanese art form, one that actually honors the beauty of being broken and rebuilt, instead of trying to hide it. It's called kintsugi, and honestly, it's the perfect model for this entire process. The cracks in the pottery aren't hidden or disguised, they're filled with gold, they're highlighted. The object is considered more valuable, more beautiful, because it was broken. This is exactly what we're aiming for, turning those points of fracture into features of incredible strength. You know, after a setback, some people might just quickly throw together a functional shack just to get by. But your process, it's different. It's deeper. It's slower, more intentional. You're not just patching a hole, you are rebuilding a sanctuary, a structure of immense complexity, beauty, and meaning.
And this whole process moves you way beyond simple resilience. You go from being fragile, something that's broken by stress, to being what's called anti-fragile. And what that means is you don't just withstand stress anymore. You actually use its energy to grow stronger, to blow past your previous baseline.
Okay, so we've got the biology, we've got the philosophy. Now let's get to the most important part, the blueprint. How do we actually do this? How do we physically move from feeling shattered to becoming integrated? Well, we use the integration protocol. So here it is, the integration protocol. It's a 4-step framework. First, we have narrative reframing, which is like the audit. Second, somatic grounding, where we flush the load. Third is the gold leak, all about finding the insight. And finally, strategic vulnerability, or how we show the seams. Let's walk through each one. Step 1, narrative reframing. This is a massive identity shift. It's huge. You stop telling yourself the story that you are broken. Instead, you adopt the mindset of an architect. You say, okay, my old design had a limitation. It couldn't handle that level of complexity. So now I'm overseeing a necessary renovation. See the difference? You immediately take back control of the story.
Step 2 is somatic grounding. Because you hyperencode trauma physically in your body, you have to get it out. Think of it like this. Your body's alarm system, the amygdala, is still ringing long after the event is over. You cannot start drawing up new blueprints while the fire alarm is blaring in your ear. So you use physical methods like cold, pressure, or movement to finally tell your nervous system, hey, the threat is gone. We're safe now.
All right, step 3 is where we find the gold. Once that alarm is finally off, you can start sifting through the rubble to find the valuable stuff. You ask yourself this one simple question, and this is the beginning of your audit. What's the one crucial thing this whole experience taught me about my own hardware? What did you learn? Maybe you found out that your capacity for stress requires way more scheduled downtime, what we can call buffer time. Or hey, maybe you realized your boundaries, your glass wall, were just way too thin. That single crucial insight, that is your gold. That's the material you're going to use to reinforce the new structure you're building.
And that brings us to the final step. Number 4, show the seams. This is what we call strategic vulnerability. You don't hide the repairs. By sharing the story of how you rebuilt, not how you broke, but how you rebuilt, you're actually providing a blueprint for others. You're showing them that this kind of architectural growth isn't just possible, it's the whole point.
So where does all of this lead? Well, it leads to a complete redefinition of who you are and what you are truly capable of. You're no longer the victim of the story. You become the integrated architect.
If you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. For so long, you might have felt like you're just a flawed version of a normal person. But the truth is, you're a high-resolution version of a human who has gone through a rigorous testing and refinement process that, frankly, most people just haven't.
And never, ever forget this. The cracks aren't defects. They're not flaws to be ashamed of. They are the very openings that allow new light, new data, and new strength to pour into the engine and power you forward.
So the final charge is this. Stop judging the process. Start observing it. Be the architect. Your sensitivity was never a liability. It is the very tool you will use to build a life of profound and incredible strength.